that they are not athletes in the sense that they can hit a 100-mile-an-hour fastball or they can cut a run in a football game on a dime. But I do think that they have to have some physical stamina to complete a race.
That does.
So we'll meet in the middle on that, or at least I'll meet you in the middle halfway and agree partially with you. But, Mike, let's get into the show. We have some exciting college football games coming up this week, especially locally. Cincinnati on Saturday travels down to Arkansas. Notre Dame travels over to Ohio State. And I believe tomorrow night, IU opens up against Illinois. Do you have any good takes on the IU, Notre Dame, or UC game coming up this week?
Well, which one? You got to pick one.
Well, let's just go in order. Tell me your thoughts on the IU-Illinois game Friday night.
IU-Illinois. It's Indiana football, which is always exciting to talk about. At least it was for a little over a year, and then it went back to the way it was. I don't know. It's IU. The issue with IU this year is not whether they'll be any good or not. The issue with IU is with the schedule they play. With the schedule they play, will we even notice? I mean, they could have the same record as last year and be a better team just because of what happened last year. You had a lot of injuries. You lose Penix, the starting quarterback. Now he's gone. He's the starting quarterback in, what, I think it's Washington. Has some advantage here because they did play last week. They came off a 32-point win against Wyoming, which is this kind of start a team like Illinois with a new coach, Brett Bielema. They need to really get when you look at Indiana and Illinois, this would be a great basketball game, Joe. How about that?
I agree totally. Let's talk about UC and Arkansas a little bit, which is a game that's on my radar, as you know. I am a UC football fan, so I'm going to be biting my nails for about 3 hours on Saturday watching that game. What are your thoughts on UC and Arkansas?
Well, that game is hard to judge because UC, they lost a lot of guys last year. But the thing about Cincinnati right now, with Luke Fickell, they have been recruiting at a much higher level. I think Luke Fickell is a hell of a coach. And overall show you whether they are an elite program that reloads or if they have to rebuild. You know, it's like UCF was really good for 2 or 3 years, and then it dropped off because those guys were gone. So the question here is, can Cincinnati replicate this with new guys? And I think the big question with the Bearcats is who's going to be the quarterback.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of surprises me that we're 2 games away from the opening game of the season against Arkansas, and as a fan of the University of Cincinnati, I don't know who the starting quarterback's going to be. Have you got any insight or who you think?
To me, it's
got any insight or who you think?
To me, it should be Evan Prater.
Okay.
The kid from Wyoming. I thought he should have been the quarterback over Desmond Ridder last year.
Really?
I think the kid's that good. I like Prater a lot. He was a stud at Wyoming. You look at him, to me, Evan Prater is the guy. 9 guys drafted last year. They made a playoff run. But you can't overlook what UC brings back either, because they bring back all 5 offensive line starters. They've got 3 senior defensive line starters. They've got a pair of 3-year starters at defensive back, not to mention tight end Josh Wiley, who has 12 career touchdown catches. You know, he's a valuable security blanket for whichever quarterback is there. Everything I heard tells me the quarterback is going to be Ben Bryant. I disagree with that, but I'm not the coach. I don't see him every day at practice, and there's no reason to doubt Luke Fickell. And when you look at Arkansas, the issue is going to be stopping them from running the ball, because last year I think they were 7th nationally running the ball. Dominic Johnson led the way with 5.9 yards per carry, but he is questionable after a knee injury. You've got Raheem Sanders, who should take over. You know, he played really well. And then you take over. You know, he played really well. And then you've got quarterback K.J. Jefferson, who is a guy that led in rushing in 2021. He's a great thrower. He's a multi-guy there. The receivers won't be as good because Treylon Burks is gone. That will definitely hurt them. And this is a game Arkansas has. And by being stuck there, when you look at their schedule is loaded. So they almost have to beat Cincinnati this first game to be able to replicate what they did last year. And last year, they had a really good season. K.J. Jefferson was great. They made a decent bowl game. So I think the Cincinnati defensive unit played well in the red zone last year. They're going to have to play well in the red zone here. They were number 3 in the nation in takeaways. They're going to have to replicate that stuff. And the one thing I do know about teams that cause a lot of turnovers, it's hard to carry that through to the next year. And I think that's going to be an issue. And I expect with Arkansas, you're not going to get anything flashy. They are a hard-nosed football team. I think this is going to be a great football game.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great football game, too, even though I'm going to be stressed out for the 3.5 hours that it takes place. Mike, a couple of weeks ago, Ryan and I on this show kind of talked about Notre Dame and Notre Dame, and, of course, I'm a fan of UC. And he asked me the question of what is a successful season for the Cincinnati Bearcats coming off their playoff run this year. So what at the end of the year do you think makes this a successful team for the University of Cincinnati? Now, I told him that I have realistic expectations. I don't expect another playoff run out of the University of Cincinnati this year for obvious reasons. I think that they have a little tougher schedule this year. But what, in your opinion, makes it a successful season for Cincinnati this year?
A successful season, I mean, it's winning the AAC again. I mean, right now, you played the college playoffs last year. If you can't win the AAC, it's hard to consider it a success. So I think winning the conference makes it a success, ending up in the top 15 while winning the conference. But that's what makes this game interesting, because if Cincinnati was to go down and beat Arkansas, I mean, then all of a sudden the possibility that you could go undefeated again is there.
Right.
Now, I mean, I can honestly tell you this. I don't think Cincinnati is going to Arkansas and win it. I think they're going to lose the game by about a touchdown. But with a young team coming into a situation like this with a new quarterback. But when you look at Cincinnati's schedule, I mean, there's nothing here that really scares you. It's not like last year where you're sitting there playing at Notre Dame. You're playing at Arkansas now, which is ranked 19th. I think Notre Dame was ranked 5th before.
Right.
But then you look at the schedule. You got
Right.
But then you look at the schedule. You got Kennesaw State, Miami, Indiana, which will be a nice win for them. You go to Tulsa, which has been a solid program. You go to UCF, it's SMU. So you're playing a bunch of teams here, Navy, that are dangerous teams because they're solid football teams and they're well coached. But when you look at this, there's no other ranked opponent in here. So to me, to be successful, say you lose to Arkansas, maybe you lose one other game here. But let's face it, if you're going to go play in the Big 12 and you think you can compete in the Big 12, I mean, the AAC is nothing compared to the Big 12. You got South Florida, Tulsa, SMU, UCF, Navy, East Carolina, Tulane, and Temple.
Right.
I mean, that if you are a big-time program, if you're a top 20 program, and that's the thing I heard Fickle talk about on TV locally the other day, was he doesn't want to be a top 10 team. He wants to be a top 10 program. To be a top 10 program, this team has to go at least 9-3, 10-3. I mean, I don't think if you ask Luke Fickell what would be a success, it would be going undefeated, because the Arkansas game is the only game on here where I would see where they would be underdogs, because the other really good team in the AAC, they don't play until a conference championship game, which is Houston.
Right.
So if you could win all that out and get the Conference USA or Conference or AAC championship game at Nippert Stadium, win that, you're sitting at 12-1. You've got a good possibility to play in a what is it they call it, the first six on New Year's Day.
Yes.
Because really, when you look at this, no matter what UC does, unless they were to just beat everybody by 50 points and a lot of weird stuff happened at the top, they're not going into college football playoffs unless they were to beat Arkansas, and then Arkansas runs it out from there and wins their conference championship. So to me, I mean, a New Year's Six bowl game is probably the best they can do right now. But I mean, this is a team you cannot afford to lose 4 or 5 games, because it just kind of puts you back when you were UCF. You know, you had the 1 or 2 years, 3 years where you caught lightning in a bottle, and then you just kind of reverted back to the pack.
Right. Yeah, and I agree with that. My hopes for the UC schedule is that, you know, IU has a great season and that becomes a quality win, and maybe maybe, you know, Navy can find some spark this year, and that becomes somewhat of a quality win. But you're absolutely right. Looking at their schedule, just at a glance, they open up the season with their hardest game of the year. So, I totally agree with everything you had to say. But
I would disagree, though. I think the hardest game of the year is Houston in the AAC championship game. I think Houston is a top 15 team.
Oh, okay, yeah, I agree with that. I'm talking about the.
I know. The games that you're guaranteed to play.
Right.
Yeah.
So, well, Mike, before we run out of time on this first segment, I also want to get to the Ohio State Notre Dame game this week, which is a lot of fans game. If you look at the betting lines, not that I'm a betting man, but if you look at the betting lines on this game, Ohio State's kind of favored, I think, right now by 12.5 on this game, and
17.5. Right
17.5. So, I think that's kind of outrageous for Notre Dame. It's kind of slap in the face to them. I know the Horseshoe is an incredibly hard place for teams to come into and play and win, but give me your take on that game.
Well, I think this comes down to Ohio State's defense. Jim Knowles comes over from Oklahoma State, where he coordinated college football's number 3 defense last season, and he's there to repair a Buckeyes unit which looked confused, out of place, and overmatched in 2 losses last year against Oregon, which was at the start of the year, and Oregon was a 17-point dog at Ohio State, and, of course, Michigan, which both had big play attacks. I think with Jim Knowles as a defensive coordinator, you can expect an aggressive, defensive back-led approach that wants to lock down deep passing lanes. They get physical with receivers, and they pressure the quarterback. Now, Notre Dame, on the other hand, I think will move the ball. Tyler Buchner is unproven at quarterback, but he showed flashes in big moments last year. He has some really good receivers led by Lorenzo Styles. And the thing is, Notre Dame's defense is really good, but you have to eliminate Ohio State's big plays. And when you look at Ohio State, there's 3 guys here we could see in New York when you've got the Heisman finalists. You've got C.J. Stroud, who had 44 touchdown passes last year in his first year as a starter. You got Jackson Smith and Gibby, or whatever the hell you say his name is, who led OSU in receiving, even with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson on the roster. And then you've got Trevion Henderson, who is a great running back. That's a 3-headed monster. So I know the point spread is not that far off. I would actually, even though I will bet Notre Dame, if I was a betting man, I would bet Notre Dame and take the 17.5 points. I think this is probably a 2-touchdown game. So I think this is probably a 55-45 proposition where I take the points. But you've also got the question of Marcus Freeman. I mean, all Notre Dame people love Marcus Freeman, but we don't really know how good of a coach Marcus Freeman is yet. But he brings a lot of energy, and the best time to play Ohio State, and it was proven by Oregon last year, is the first game of the season, and it's really important to get him right away here, because with Knowles as a new defensive coordinator, this team is going to be still trying to get their sea legs to be able to play defense. So I think Notre Dame has an outside shot to win the game. I think they'll cover. If you put a gun to my head, I would say 31-20 Notre Dame. 20 Notre Dame.
Well, I can't disagree with anything you said there. I think you're spot on. Here's my question, though. If Notre Dame is unable to come out of this game with a win, are their college playoff hopes, are they gone at that point this early in the season?
How do they lose? Is this a 48-10 game, or are you talking it's a close competitive game they had a shot at?
Okay, yeah, I see your point there, and that's a very good point. So if they come out of this game 28-24, 27-24, you think that playoff hopes are still alive if they show a competitive game, but they go into the shoe and get blown out.
Yeah, especially if they lose a close game to Ohio State, and then Ohio State runs the table. I mean, if they were to go to Ohio State and lose 31-28 on a last-second field goal, it changes things. And when you look at Notre Dame's schedule, number one, they're Notre Dame. That always gives them a chance. But when you look at the schedule, you've got a game against BYU, who I think BYU outside of Ohio State, is the toughest team on the schedule. They got to play them in Vegas. BYU was a loaded team last year. They're really good this year. You've got games against North Carolina, California, which aren't great programs, but they're still power teams. And then the big great programs, but they're still power teams. And then the big one is you host Clemson on November the 5th. You get a win against Clemson on November the 5th, considering Clemson will probably be in the top 5 right then. And then you go to USC and beat USC. USC right now is ranked 14th. They're a team appointment. You've got a new coach. You got a new quarterback. They had all kind of transfers come in. So really, when you look at Notre Dame's schedule, this is the difference between Notre Dame and Cincinnati. If Cincinnati loses to Arkansas, all hope to play in the college football playoffs is gone. But with Notre Dame, if you lose a close game, number one, you have the name recognition in Notre Dame. But number two, you still have a game at home against Clemson and a game at USC.
Yeah, very well. Well, Mike, I always enjoy listening to your input, and right after the break, we're going to come back and talk about some Bengals. Just to let everybody know in the listening area, if you miss a segment of the show, you can always head on over to The Grueling Truth. The show will air tonight at 8 o'clock on The Grueling Truth if you do miss a segment shortly after it airs out on the radio. So, Mike, we'll be right.
What's up, guys? I'm Mike Goodpaster from the Grueling Truth Sports Network. I want to thank you guys for listening in to Ryan and Joe on the Sports Hour. And I want to remind you, the Grueling Truth Sports Network is powered and brought to you by Betting.net. Betting.net is the best bet for betting the online casino or sports book that's right for you. Make sure you check them out now, guys, at Betting.net. This is a great service. If you live in Indiana or you live in Kentucky or you live in Ohio, if you go on Betting.net, it will actually take you to the best sites to legally bet in the state you live in. Make sure you check them out at betting.net. And right now, we're going to go back to Ryan and Joe at the Sports Hour.
Hello, and welcome back to Froggy Talking Sports with Ryan and Joe. I'm still here with my good friend Mike Goodpaster. Mike, we're going to talk a little Bengals this segment. And as you know, the Bengals have initially broken their roster down to their 53-man roster, and they've made some surprising moves over the last couple of days. I know moves that surprised me with the move yesterday of learning that they have cut their backup quarterback, Brandon Allen. Anything else surprise you about the Bengals 53-man roster moving into the season?
It surprised me they were a little light on wide receivers compared to last year. I thought they'd have kept one of the two guys that played really well during the preseason. That surprised me a little bit, but nothing really shocked. The only thing that shocked me is I don't know why they're still messing with Jackson Carman. And I thought they made an aggressive salary cap move yesterday by signing guard Manning. He's a 2019 second-round pick of the Texans. They signed Devin Asize, who was a third-round pick of the Patriots, and defensive tackle Jay Tufele, who was a fourth-round pick of the Jaguars. I think Sharping was a great addition. I think Tufele could be a guy as a rotational defensive lineman that fits in well also. I wasn't a big fan of Zize or whatever his name is from the Patriots. Of course, it looked like they were going to get O.J. Howard for a while. I'm not sure that I was a big fan of that because O.J. Howard really is disappointed and not lived up to what he was supposed to be anyways, Joe.
Right. And from what I understand, that young man that they took from the Texans off waivers, what was his name again, Mike?
Max Sharping.
Max Sharping. I read today, my understanding is that the front office over there is not real happy about the Bengals picking him up. I think that they were going to try to put him on waivers and bring him back to their practice squad, at least initially at the start of the season. Now, my question is, and this is a huge question for me, and maybe I'm overthinking it, and you can give me some insight on this. What do the Bengals do right now, or what are they looking for? Because right now they only have one quarterback on their roster. They have a depth chart of one with Joe Burrow. So
I think people are overreacting because, number one, you're not going to cut that quarterback without a plan. Number two, it's always possible that they removed him because they had to remove three guys to sign the three guys. They will get them into practice, and somebody probably gets cut by Monday, and Brandon Allen's the backup quarterback again.
Okay.
Because no matter what anybody says about bringing guys in, you could go with Jake Browning. Jake Browning, to me, looks like technically the better quarterback, but Brandon Allen has a lot of experience, and people forget Brandon Allen was in L.A. with Zach Taylor for a couple years. He's been here ever since Zach got here. I think they're comfortable with him. He knows the offense. I mean, he's not a very good quarterback, but he's a backup for a reason. There's not too many teams that are really solid at backup quarterback. So I think people are kind of jumping to conclusions here. I would say just let this play out. By Monday, you'll know what the Bengals roster is going to be.
Now, even though the roster is cut down, they have signed the practice squad players to the practice squad roster. What are the Bengals, do you think, what are they still looking for as the season approaches 2 weeks? Is there any holes that they still need to fill, in your opinion?
I would say offensive line. I mean, because really you're going with Cordell Volson as a starter, which tells me there's not much depth. Now, the thing about Volson, he's going to start as a fourth-round pick, opening day left guard. Last time, he is the first rookie offensive lineman to start for the Bengals on opening day since Taylor's first game in 2019 when they started fourth-rounder Michael Jordan. Let's hope to God he's not Michael Jordan because Michael Jordan sucked, but Michael Jordan never should have been drafted. I have a lot of questions about Volson, and I have a lot of questions about this offensive line because, you know, a couple guys go down and this line all of a sudden looks really similar to last year.
Right.
And I think also when you rate the Bengals offensive line, I still think with what they got now, they're still going to be in the bottom half of the league on how much Joe Burrow gets hit. And I think it's going to be hard to ever have a line in front of Joe Burrow where he doesn't get hit a lot because Joe Burrow will hold on to the ball trying to extend the play to make a play. So, I mean, Cordell Volson scares me. I don't think he's necessarily a great guard. I think he is an upgrade from Jackson Carman because I think the difference between the two is that Carman's never going to get better because Jackson Carman is lazy. I mean, last year he put on a bunch of weight after he got drafted. And, you know, but with this kid, Volson, the Volson kid to me seems like he's a guy that is going to work his butt off, so he's going to get better. But the only thing really that worries me is just depth on the offensive line.
Yeah, and that is a big worry of mine as well. I don't want to put too much time into talking about the punter competition, but another roster move that really surprised me is I thought Drew Chrisman had the punting job locked up over Cincinnati native and longtime Bengal Kevin Huber, and as the 53-man roster came out, it seems that Kevin Huber won the job, and I thought maybe Chrisman outperformed him in the preseason. Do you have any insight as to why the Bengals might have stuck with Kevin Huber over Drew Chrisman?
They're comfortable. I mean, it's really hard when you got a guy, a field goal kicker or a punter that you really trust, that has always come through. And let's face it, Huber was one of the best punters in the NFL over the last 10 years. I mean, he never really got the credit for it because, let's face it, the Bengals usually weren't that good. But he is also the holder for your kicker, who was highly successful. And kickers can be dudes sometimes. You know, that could, you know, kill McPherson's confidence if you change that. But I think in the end, Drew Chrisman will be the punter for the Cincinnati Bengals unless somebody else gets him first. I think he's got the bigger leg right now. I think this is more they trust Huber. But I also remember this. Last year in the playoffs, it's not like Kevin Huber made a bunch of big punts.
Right.
And, I mean, really, he was not what he once was, which none of us are as we get older. But the thing that worries me here is they're going to wait a year too long to make this decision. And they've got a guy in Drew Chrisman out of LaSalle High School, you know, that Ohio State that could pop in here right now. And my concern is sometime in this next year while he's on the practice squad, somebody's just going to sign him.
Right.
And then you've lost your option with Kevin Huber. Huber's 40 years old. But I still think a lot of this comes in with just the holding, because when you listened to Zach Taylor before the season started, he brought up Kevin Huber's ability to hold an awful lot.
Right. Which is very important. You know, I you can't overstate that a bunch, and you just hit on that. So, yeah, Yeah, I agree with that. I think that you got to keep old Shooter happy with who's holding his punts, and he's got to have confidence as he takes his steps back as well. Moving on.
Well, I think old Shooter, if he's that damn good, it shouldn't matter who holds for the damn kicks. So it does concern me that we are going with probably less of a punter than what we were, or what we could have.
Right.
Because I think Drew Crispin is the guy. I think he's an NFL punter. He's like 23, 24 years old. I mean, heck, you could have your punter for the next decade and a half, just like you did with Huber.
Yeah, and fans always seem to get behind a Cincinnati native, and I think that's why Kevin Huber's had such a great time in Cincinnati. He loves this city. He's from this city. So moving on, though, to the AFC North, I'm going to ask you a very general question and then just let you run with it. Where the Bengals here and where they come out at the end of the season?
Well, it's first or second. I mean, I think from looking at it, it's a two-horse race. It's the Bengals and the Ravens.
Okay. Who in your gut right now, setting your fandom aside of the Cincinnati Bengals, who in your gut are you going with right now as we head into the season?
Well, I would go with the Bengals. I mean, it's just I'm more comfortable with Joe Burrow than I am Lamar Jackson. I still think that you don't have enough. Put it like this, the best case scenario for the Ravens is that health is on their side this year. The defense, young receiving core to take the next step on as a passer in his fifth season. And the worst case is the Ravens defense is less than the sum of its parts. And what I mean there is you're adding Kyle Hamilton, you're adding some guys in the secondary. You had some guys that were out last year that really haven't played much in the last year and a half. So I think a worst-case scenario for the Ravens at the start of the year would be the secondary is slow to gel. And, too often that means maybe they fall behind, which the problem with being the Ravens here is if you fall behind, you're not really set up to be a team that come from behind because you're set up to be a running team. And I always like to look at the best-case scenario, worst-case scenario, because usually what you're going to get is somewhere in the middle. The best-case scenario for the Bengals would be that last winter was no fluke. And Joe Burrow picks up where he left off, becomes the third Bengal quarterback after Esiason and Anderson to capture NFL MVP honors. And the defense turns in a stout season, and the AFC's road to the Super Bowl runs through Cincinnati. And that is something I think is very possible to happen. Now, the worst-case scenario is the wear and tear of last year's 21-game schedule shows up in injuries on defense, leading to weekly shootouts where we've got to outscore everybody. Now, Burrow provides enough firepower to keep Cincinnati alive, but they would then have to fight for their playoff life probably at a season-ending home dates with Buffalo and Baltimore. And everybody worries about the schedule. You've got Buffalo and Baltimore right at the end of the season, which could decide everything. So when you look at all that, I think Baltimore's health will be better this year. I think their young receiving core will actually be better without Hollywood Brown. I think this is a team that has probably got the second best coach in the NFL with it, which worries me also. The Ravens' defense is going to be tough. They're going to be able to run the ball. Cincinnati, was last year a fluke? I don't know, because this is the thing. It wasn't like they were great all year. They were great at the end, which is fine. But with a young team, you don't know if they just kind of caught lightning in a bottle or if they're really that good. I think when you look at the roster, they look to be really that good. Now, if the Bengals were to finish second in this division, it would be just from coaching, I would think, because Harbaugh does scare me there because he's a great football coach. I mean, there's not too many years where the Ravens have finished under 500. I think it's been once or twice, and those were basically because of injuries. So when you look at that, I think the Bengals had the better quarterback. I think they had the better running back. I think Joe Mixon gets underrated big time, and people got to realize 1,200 yards behind a really bad offensive line. I think this is a year you could see Joe Mixon. I think I said Burrow before, but I think this is a year where you could see Joe Mixon run for 1,500 or 1,600 yards and win the MVP, or not the MVP, but the rushing title. You look at the wide receivers. If they stay healthy, there's no better wide receivers anywhere. Now, when you match up the Bengals' defense with the Ravens' defense, I don't think it's as big a matchup as people think. I think that Logan Wilson, between the two teams, is the best linebacker. Now, of course, I think the Ravens are probably deeper a linebacker, but on the defensive front, I think the Ravens could still have a hard time stopping the run. I think the Bengals are actually better with their front four than the Ravens are. And, I mean, because you've got Trey Hendrickson, you got Sam Hubbard. I know I'm missing somebody else. You got Joseph Asai, if he's as good as people think he is.
Right.
Defensive backfield-wise, when you add Jesse Bates, I mean, people during the season, if you were to see maybe Mike Hilton replace Eli Apple if Apple has issues, but
right.
even if he doesn't, there's a lot of depth there because you've got Eli Apple, who I thought played really well. He was really underrated last year because he had this tendency to run his mouth when he shouldn't, and that's what people see, and he failed in New York. But he failed in New York also because there was no players around him.
Right.
And you look in the secondary, you've got Von Bell, you've got Jesse Bates, two strong veteran leaders. You got Dax Hill, who looks like he's going to be the real deal. And then I think the big thing is, Awuzie. Is he as good as he showed, or is he mediocre, which is what he showed the rest of his career? And that's kind of where the fluke thing comes in. Because Eli Apple and Awuzie never played near the level ever in their career that they did last year. So is that level, because they've improved, they've gotten better coaching and they've got better, or did they just kind of catch lightning in a bottle for a year?
Yeah, I don't know, especially with Eli Apple. I know people love to hate Eli Apple, but you know, I think they harp on the bad things that they see, and nobody really pays attention to when he's doing his job.
Dude, they would not have been in a Super Bowl if it wasn't for Eli Apple.
I agree. I think he did a great job last week. I think he's just one of those Bengals players that people love to hate. But
well, they love to hate him, and he brings it on himself, though.
I agree with that. Hey, but before we end the segment, as much as it disgusts me, we do have Steeler fans and Brown fans in our listening area here.
Why?
I don't know why, Mike. It baffles me every day. But what is your outlook for the Steelers under their new young quarterback this year?
Well, we don't know if they're going to be under a new young quarterback or not. I think they will be at some point. I think Kenny Pickett is their best. If I was them, I would put Kenny Pickett in and just let him play. We know what Mitch Trubisky is. We know what Mason Rudolph is.
Right.
And they suck. So, best case scenario for Pittsburgh.
All right.
The defense is much more than just a T.J. Watt show. It's gonna have to be. And I mean, you're gonna have a revival of the steel curtain if Pittsburgh's gonna do anything this year. And I don't think they have the players on defense to do that. The worst-case scenario is the quarterback play is no better than it was with an aging Big Ben. Pickett doesn't show coaches enough to get on the field. Trubisky will do what he did in Chicago, which every once in a while he'll flash some ability that makes you fall in love, but he's going to be so erratic, he's going to be terrible. The run defense still remains an issue, and the Steelers basically squander another year of Watt's prime. When I look at the Steelers' worst-case scenario, it looks like the best bet. I think Mike Tomlin is a good coach, but I don't think he'll go with Kenny Pickett right away. I think that's their best chance. You go to Cleveland, I mean, why do the Browns even still exist in the NFL?
Yeah.
There should be relegation like there is in soccer, and the relegation should come from the stupidity to take a quarterback who's going to miss at least half the season anyways.
Right.
I mean, Jacoby Brissett, is he going to be the starter?
Well, if he is, they're in a world of hurt. But I think
they're in the same world as the Pittsburgh Steelers, though. And they do have a run game with Nick Chubb. The defense has taken a step up, I think, a little bit. But then you've got the worst-case scenario, which it only takes a few close September losses on this team, which is full of distractions, to just kind of snowball and go completely out of control. So I think this season lasts. They win 5 or 6 games, and I think what we'll see then is Kevin Stefanski come under fire as a second straight season unravels for him. So, I mean, if they miss the playoffs, and they only win 4 or 5 games. Hell, they could have went and got C.J. Stroud, but no, they can't because basically they're stuck with Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, and I don't know that was a great move. I don't think he was a great quarterback, but I felt like he should have been run out of the league and not just doing a half a season suspension.
Well, I believe this. I believe Deshaun Watson is a great quarterback who's taken bad Texans teams to the playoffs over the last few years. I think you're nuts if you think he's just average or below average. I think he is a guy that when he played was a top 6 quarterback in the NFL, and he won a lot of games on teams that shouldn't have been winning games. But the problem is this: his character is at more than question, and you can't have a leader who is like that.
No, I agree. Well, Mike, I want to thank you for saving the day with us here today on Froggy Talking Sports with Ryan and Joe. I really do appreciate your insight. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll be talking NASCAR playoffs. Mike, thank you again, and as you said, as I said, you are the founder of the Grueling Truth Sports Network, and our show actually does air over there. When are you starting your Bengals Weekly show?
Bengals Weekly show will be next week. Actually, tomorrow we were going to have Ryan with us, but since you said Ryan's in Florida, myself and Notre Dame football legend Tony Hunter will be doing our first Irish Football Weekly, where we'll break down the Ohio State Notre Dame game. And then in a couple months, when the Indiana Hoosiers begin their run to win the national championship for the first time since 1987, myself and Steve Risley will be back with the Indiana Basketball Weekly show. You can hear it all on the Grueling Truth. You can follow us on Twitter at Grueling_Truth and follow us on YouTube.
What's up, guys? I'm Mike Goodpaster from the Grueling Truth Sports Network. I want to thank you guys for listening in to Ryan and Joe on the Sports Hour. And I want to remind you, the Grueling Truth Sports Network is powered and brought to you by Betting.net. Betting.net is the best bet for betting the online casino or sports book that's right for you. Make sure you check them out now, guys, at Betting.net. This is a great service. If you live in Indiana or you live in Kentucky or you live in Ohio, if you go on Betting.net, it will actually take you to the best sites to legally bet in the state you live in. Make sure you check them out at Betting.net. And right now, we're going to go back to Ryan and Joe at the Sports Hour.
Hello, and welcome back to the final segment of Froggy Talking Sports with Ryan and Joe. As you know, Ryan is off gallivanting in the Sunshine State. And for our final segment, we're going to talk some NASCAR and the upcoming NASCAR playoffs. And I have with me my good friend who does the weekly NASCAR show with me on the Grueling Truth, the one and only Steve Risley. Steve, how are you doing?
I'm doing great today. It's 11 o'clock here. It is already 105 degrees.
Yeah. Well, and as you guys might have figured out, Steve is not with us here in Indiana. He is.
Ain't nothing great about Los Angeles, Joe.
Not even the traffic.
Not even the traffic.
Well, as many listeners here in our area, Steve, they might recognize your name. If you do recognize Steve's name, the reason why you recognize his name is he was part of the 1981 National Championship IU basketball team. So it's a great pleasure to have him with us here on the show tonight. And I know we have many IU fans, Steve, so I think that they're going to enjoy listening to you talk a little NASCAR over the next couple hours. But before we get into that, they're probably thinking, why is Steve Risley talking about NASCAR? And Steve, you want to give a little bit about your background in NASCAR and your being on the race sponsorship committee?
I took up NASCAR back in probably 1981 when Dale Earnhardt first started making his move. I liked bad guys. I was kind of always an enforcer on the basketball court. So I loved that and really loved the way he raced. And then went through the battles with him and Jeff Gordon and saw the sport evolve into what it is today, which I think is the most enjoyable form of motorsports there is. I had the privilege and fortune I spent my career working for Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, and we had Mark Martin in the Viagra car. I had hot passes for 5 years to any race I wanted to go to, and got to know Mark fairly well, and the team and the crew chief, and just really fell in love with the sport even more than I can imagine. We had the vodka car in our driveway every year for 5 years, hosting a party. Not the car, the race car, but a show car. And I just think it's a very fun sport to watch. The safety that's evolved into the sport since Dale Earnhardt passed away has really changed the outcomes and the dynamics of the sport. And now with the next gen cars, they're even more safe and more durable. And I think it's one of the up and coming true great sports in America. Auto racing, America's known for cars. And, you know, these are the closest things to street cars we can find. They're not street cars anymore, but it's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun, Steve. And I will tell you before we get into the playoffs here, the NASCAR playoffs, I do want to tell you that I did previously on the show, Mike Goodpaster just left us, and I asked him the question at the beginning of the show when I was kind of letting listeners know what was coming up in the show. And when we talked about NASCAR, I asked Mike Goodpaster if NASCAR is a sport, because he always says that it's not, at least to you and me. And I asked him if he still held true to that, and he still is under the idea and belief that NASCAR is not a sport. So I don't know that I agree with him on that. What do you think?
Well, Mike's a stick and ball kind of guy. I mean, you know, he's an old school stick and ball kind of guy. He doesn't get it. I don't know that he's ever even been in a go-kart and raced a competitive car. I have done that, and I ran one time for 2 hours straight, and I thought it's the closest I came to death in my life. My hands were bloodied. I could barely hold on to the steering wheel, and to anybody, and I was sweating so profusely in a driver's suit and a helmet. Anybody that doesn't think that auto racing is a sport is just knuck and futz. You know, they just are. And Mike's an idiot. We all know Mike's an idiot. We take that for granted every day that we work with him, and he's a great guy. I love him to death. Auto racing is not a sport. So take it over, Mike. You know, Mike, get out of here, Mike. I will say this, Joe. When IU basketball starts, I will come back and join you. I spoke yesterday to Coach Woodson and Landon Turner, and both were extremely optimistic. Landon goes down to about every practice every day, and Mike was extremely excited. Matter of fact, I got booted off the call with Landon because Isaiah Thomas called Landon, so I had to get off the phone. Isaiah's a little higher on the food chain than I am, so. Well, and it said, let me call you back. Well, but when you talk IU basketball, I'll come back and we'll be ready to talk IU hoops. I got some insight on that, too.
We appreciate that, Stephen. You kind of just let the cat out of the bag a little bit. We were trying to hold that back as kind of a special treat for our listeners. So no, it's okay. You heard it here first, Steve. It's okay. You heard it here first. Steve Risley's going to be back to talk IU basketball. We'll probably have him back on probably a maybe not a weekly basis, but maybe a bi-weekly basis to kind of sum up everything that we're seeing on the court for IU once the season kicks off. So anyway, Steve, this is a NASCAR segment, so Sunday, the NASCAR playoffs start at Darlington Raceway. And real quick, in case you are not aware, anybody that may be listening, the 16 drivers that have made the field this year for the 2022 NASCAR playoffs are Chase Elliott, Joey Logano, Ross Chastain, Kyle Larson, William Byron, Denny Hamlin, Ryan Blaney, Tyler Reddick, Kevin Harvick, Christopher Bell, Kyle Busch, Chase Briscoe, Daniel Suarez, Austin Cindric, Alex Bowman, and last week picking up his first win of the season, sneaking his way into the playoffs and knocking Martin Truex out, Austin Dillon. But that's really not the full picture there, Steve, right? Because Martin Truex was kind of already knocked out anyway. Kurt Busch had qualified for the playoffs, but sustained a injury in a qualifying wreck about 3 weeks out off the top of my head now.
Pocono. It was Pocono.
Okay, at Pocono, yeah. Sustained a concussion at qualifying at Pocono, and it has put him out for the rest of the season, and I think that we'll have to wait and see what this brings for next year and the rest of his career. I think we're all kind of speculating on whether or not Kurt Busch, we may have seen him for the last time in a race car, but he bowed out of the playoffs, opened up 2 more spots. It looked like Ryan Blaney and Martin Truex were both going to get in, but Austin Dillon snuck in with the rain-shortened race at Daytona this past week and qualified for the playoffs. However, there is some big news coming out of the playoffs. Although Bubba Wallace did not qualify for the playoffs, Kurt Busch's car did, Steve. So you want to tell us a little bit about what's going on with Bubba Wallace and Kurt Busch's car?
Yeah, well, Bubba's going to take over the 45 car. He was driving the 23 car all year. Now, the car is not eligible for the championship, but it is eligible for the Owners' Championship, and the 45 car was much higher in points than the 23 car. So Jordan and Hamlin are going to put Bubba in the 45 car, and I assume they're going to move Ty Gibbs over to the 23 car and let him run that car for the remainder of the season now. And Bubba's going to run that car for the remainder of the season, trying to get a higher standing in the Owners' points. I don't think there's any possibility of Bubba winning the Owners' Championship because of Chase Elliott and what he's done already. I think he's pretty well almost locked that up as well. But it's a unique move, but that's the way the sport, it's the dynamic of the sport now. And I think NASCAR wants to highlight Bubba Wallace as a driver, and this is a great way to keep him in the mix in some way if he cannot compete individually for the Drivers' Championship.
Right. Now, as they move into Darlington this week, what drivers that are in the championship do you think are going to do well, and what big name drivers might we see falter here at Darlington this coming week?
Well, I think this is a track. It's often called the track too tough to tame. You earn your Darlington stripes. There's a lot of cliches with this racetrack. I think I would put my money if I was gambling. I would put my money on the veteran drivers who have driven this track multiple times before. It is considered a super speedway by NASCAR standards because of the banking. Although it's tracked and with the high groove being very difficult, the guys that are probably going to do good are going to be guys like Chase Elliott. If he can stay out of trouble, will do well. If he can keep his car up front, I put my money on Harvick, Logano. Truex is a guy that can come through. Kyle Busch is definitely a guy who's good on a track like this. Your younger guys who have not raced this track enough yet may struggle a little bit here and may cause some mayhem too, because once you get up on the Darlington stripe, there's a good chance you're going to come down off of it and do some damage. One guy that I would probably not put a lot of money on, now I say this, they'll probably win the damn race, would be Kyle Larson. Larson loves to run the high line on all tracks that he races, and this is not really a track you want to run the high line on. You want to get down low. Guys like Chase Elliott runs low, Logano runs low, Harvick runs low, and you really want to stay off that wall as much as you possibly can, and stay out front as much as you can too, because it is a track that will bite you. It will bite anybody real fast.
Yeah, I think Steve, if you remember back to the first time the drivers went to Darlington this year, you make a valid point about Kyle Larson, because it seems like at least this year with the new next gen cars that which is a whole other topic that we could talk hours about. It seems that Kyle Larson, while last year pretty much dominated the season and the playoffs, and came out with his first NASCAR championship. He has really struggled to run anywhere this year except the high line on the racetrack, and that has not been real conducive to his success this year, at least at super speedway style tracks. And we saw it the first time that they went there that it seemed like he couldn't run the low line, which on the Darlington racetrack, which was the fastest line, and really put him out of contention for winning the race. So I think that Kyle Larson has struggled a little bit, and I'm kind of anxious to see if he could pick it up in the playoffs. Now, one driver that you mentioned, Kevin Harvick, who kind of had a lackluster last year and a half, almost 2 years really, has picked it up with 2 wins here at the end of and worked his way into the playoffs. And I think that is one veteran driver, at least right now, that everybody should be keeping their eye on, because as of right now, he's really picked up his momentum heading into the playoffs. What do you think?
Yeah, Ford has found some speed. They have found speed across the board, and I definitely think now with Harvick, with the momentum he has going with his team right now, definitely is a threat to win any race from here on out. And of course, you win one race and you win the next round. So
right.
You want to get it's really nice to get that win at the first track. Then you don't have to worry about, because then they go to Bristol, and then I'm not sure where the third track is.
Well, they actually go to Kansas second, and then Bristol third. Yes.
Yeah, so you got 3 completely different styles of racing.
Which, and speaking of the playoff format, so the first round, the round of 16, which is starts this Sunday for the Southern 500 at Darlington. Then they go on to Kansas Speedway on the 11th of September, and then round out the round of 16 at Bristol Motor Speedway on September 17th. And, as you move into the round of 12, which, they will cut 4 drivers at the end of that round, and as you move into the round of 12, it's a lot of the same, really. You have go to Talladega, and then, of course, the Charlotte Motor Speedway Roval, which is kind of throwing in a road course into the mix. But I really like the round of 16 because you really get kind of everything. You get a super speedway-esque track with Darlington Raceway, which as you know, and we've talked about this a lot on our NASCAR show on the Grueling Truth, Steve, that when you go to a super speedway, it's anybody's game. And then, they go to a typical cookie-cutter mile-and-a-half with Kansas, and then they head down to Bristol Motor Speedway, which really sets up the dirt track racing guys like Kyle Larson, to try to get a win. So, as I look at it, these playoffs could be really exciting, but, like in the second round, when they go back to Talladega, that's anybody's race. And when you look at if some of these lesser named drivers, like an Austin Cindric, can make it out of the first round, which I think they have a good chance to do, they got a super speedway coming up in the second round, which can cement their way into the third round. So it's very exciting. Do you have any take on that?
No, I think you're exactly right. I think that Bristol. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Bristol this time's on concrete, right?
Concrete.
Yeah, it's on concrete. So, and Bristol to me is every bit as dangerous as Daytona,
right?
Because it's bang up, go bang bang on everybody. You put 36 cars of that speed and that size on that track, which is about a half-mile track?
Right.
Half-mile track?
Right.
I think it is, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and you're basically the lead car is on the butt of the tail end car in about 10 laps, and you're starting to pass cars, and then you're just mixing through traffic, and it's a bang bang shoot 'em up type race, and it's kind of tough to, just like Daytona was when an Austin Dillon comes through from that on a last lap crash before the rain hit. But so it's great. I love the format. I love the way they spaced. We've got a road course coming up, I think, in the third round with the second round. I'm not sure where it's at. But you got to go back to Charlotte and run the Roval. So the diversity of tracks is what makes it so great, because it does set up a case where anybody can win, and you could even have some non-cup chase drivers going for the championship win a race now. You know, you've got that opportunity to have, but there are a lot of good drivers that are left out. I mean, you still can't discount Martin Truex. I still think that's a guy who can get a win before the year's over.
Yeah, and they're still racing every week, you know, so you know, they're competitive drivers. They're still going to want to win. Steve, we just got a little bit of time left. I know this went by really quickly. I always enjoy talking NASCAR with you. But real quick, give me your predictions, which I know your gut tells you takes home the championship this year.
The championship, I'm telling you what, I got two guys in mind right now. I got down to two guys. I think it's either Joey Logano or Chase Elliott. Chase Elliott has got the points lead, but he's a steady Eddie driver, and I think you got to be a little more bold in the playoffs. I don't know how bold he'll be, but Logano's a guy that'll pound the crap out of anybody wherever you need to go, and I like Joey Logano a lot. Probably just a hair over Chase Elliott, but Chase has got a commanding lead in the points right now, and if he can hang on to that and keep his butt out of trouble, he's going to be tough to beat. But then when you get to the Phoenix in the final race, points go out the window. It's just which of the top four cars finishes first, second, third, or fourth, or the highest in the standings, whoever wins it. So I like Logano and I like Elliott.
Very well. And Steve, I hate to cut you off because, like I said, I always enjoy talking NASCAR with you. And if you want to hear Steve and I and Ryan Peters actually talk more NASCAR, we do a weekly show over on The Grueling Truth, which you can find this show as well over on The Grueling Truth after it airs out here at 95.9. I appreciate everybody tuning in for this week's show. Steve, I also want to thank you for being with us this week on Froggy and Joe Talking Sports and kind of saving the day since Ryan decided to go gallivant in the Sunshine State.
He deserves his time off.
He does. Again,
what's up, guys? I'm Mike Goodpaster from the Grueling Truth Sports Network. I want to thank you guys for listening in to Ryan and Joe on the Sports Hour. And I want to remind you, the Grueling Truth Sports Network is powered and brought to you by Betting.net. Betting.net is the best bet for betting the online casino or sports book that's right for you. Make sure you check them out now, guys, at Betting.net. This is a great service. If you live in Indiana or you live in Kentucky or you live in Ohio, if you go on betting.net, it will actually take you to the best sites to legally bet in the state you live in. Make sure you check them out at betting.net. And right now, we're going to go back to Ryan and Joe at the Sports Hour.